That thought stayed in my head the entire drive up the narrow, twisting road that led to the cabin. The rain had started halfway through the drive, coming down in heavy sheets against the windshield. The headlights barely cut through it, making the road ahead look more like a dark tunnel than anything else. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches bending under the weight of the storm, swaying like they were whispering to each other. The deeper I went, the worse I felt. It was late October 2021. My friend Daniel had given me the keys to his family's old hunting cabin, told me it would be the perfect getaway. No cell service, no internet, just peace and quiet, he had said. I had just gone through a rough breakup and figured a weekend alone in the mountains might help clear my head. I packed light, just the essentials, along with a couple of books, a flashlight, and a hunting knife, though I had no intention of actually hunting. The cabin was buried deep in the woods, sitting at the edge of a lake that stretched out into the distance. When I finally pulled up, the rain had turned the dirt road into mud. My tires slid as I parked, and I had to fight with the door just to push it open against the wind. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and hurried inside. The cabin smelled like damp wood and dust. The floors creaked under my weight as I walked through, flicking on the battery-powered lantern Daniel had left on the small wooden table in the main room. The place was small, one bedroom, a bathroom, and a tiny kitchen. No electricity, no running water. Just an old wood stove for heat and a well outside for water. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. Wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. I set my things down, changed into dry clothes, and started a fire in the stove. I sat on the old couch, listening to the storm, staring at the shadows dancing along the wooden walls. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up suddenly, my body tense, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but the cabin was silent now. The wind had died down, and all I could hear was the slow drip of rain against the roof. I sat up, rubbing my face. My throat was dry, so I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside to get water from the well. The night was pitch black. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, but it felt like it wasn't enough. The trees stood like dark silhouettes against the sky. The only sound was the dripping water from the trees. I reached the well, set the flashlight down on the stone edge, and started to crank the handle. The bucket lowered, disappearing into the darkness. The sound of the rope sliding through the pulley echoed in the stillness. Then I heard it, a sound that made my stomach drop. Footsteps, not an animal, not the rustling of branches. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I froze, my hand gripping the handle of the well. My breath caught in my throat. The sound came from the trees behind me. I turned, sweeping the flashlight toward the noise, but the beam only hit the endless wall of trees. I waited. Nothing. I pulled the bucket up fast, grabbed the flashlight, and backed toward the cabin. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I shut the door behind me and locked it. The fire had died down to embers, and the shadows in the room seemed deeper. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe an animal. Maybe my nerves playing tricks on me. But I kept the knife close that night. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, the air heavy with mist. I stepped outside, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No tracks. No broken branches. Just the empty woods stretching out in every direction. I shook off the unease and went about my day. I chopped some wood, boiled water for coffee, and sat on the porch, staring at the lake. The silence was almost too much. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I would glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees. But there was nothing. That night, I was more careful. I double-checked the locks, stoked the fire higher than necessary, sat with my back against the wall, facing the door. The wind had picked up again, carrying distant sounds through the trees. Branches creaking, leaves rustling, and then closer, much closer, a sound that made my skin crawl. Breathing, slow, heavy, just outside the cabin. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The breathing stopped. The night stretched on. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the cracks in the window. I went outside, scanning the ground for footprints. There, in the mud near the cabin's door, were deep, heavy impressions. Shoes. Someone had been standing there, listening, watching. I packed my things in minutes. I didn't care about breakfast or the water or the fire. I threw everything into my bag, ran to the car, and peeled out of there, my tires kicking up mud as I sped down the narrow road. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, surrounded by people, streetlights, noise. Daniel called me later that night, asked how the trip went. I told him the cabin was great, but I wouldn't be going back. I never told him what happened, never told anyone, but I still think about it. Somewhere, deep in those woods, someone was there, waiting, watching, and I have no idea why. I wasn't looking for a vacation, not really. I wasn't looking for an escape either. My life was fine, if a little dull. But when Sarah, an old college friend, suggested we take a weekend getaway, I thought, why not? The idea of a quiet cabin in the woods, far away from the usual noise of the city, seemed like a chance to disconnect. It was the middle of October, and the trees were already starting to change color. The weather was crisp, but not too cold, and the sun still had a few hours before it would dip below the horizon. Sarah had rented the cabin through a website that boasted of its rustic charm and seclusion. From the pictures, it looked like something straight out of a Pinterest board, an old but well-kept log cabin surrounded by dense forest. It wasn't too far from town, but far enough that you couldn't see anyone else's house or hear the highway noise. I'd never been much of a nature person, but the thought of spending a few days without distractions seemed appealing. So, I packed a bag and drove out to meet Sarah at the cabin. The place was exactly as the pictures had shown, maybe even better in person. The cabin sat nestled at the edge of a small clearing, tall trees all around it, their branches swaying in the cool breeze. The wooden exterior had a warm, inviting look to it, with dark brown tones that blended perfectly with the surrounding landscape. There was a small porch with a couple of chairs and a flickering light above the door, the kind of place you'd picture a writer or an artist coming to for solitude. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly modern for its exterior. The floors were polished wood, and there was a stone fireplace that stretched up the wall, which gave the place a cozy, rustic feel. The kitchen had all the amenities you'd expect: stainless steel appliances, a refrigerator stocked with basic essentials, and even a little coffee maker that I was already eyeing for the morning. "It's perfect," I said, glancing around as I set my bag down. Sarah was already unpacking in one of the bedrooms. "I know, right? It's exactly what I needed." We spent the next few hours settling in, unpacking, exploring the surrounding area a bit, and getting comfortable. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. I noticed how quiet it was, like really quiet. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind and the chirping of distant birds. There was no road noise, no people talking, no dogs barking, just silence. That night, after a simple dinner of pasta and wine, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, and stared out into the forest. The air was getting colder, and the darkness was starting to creep in, but the cabin felt like a little bubble of warmth. "Do you ever think about how strange it is to be out here?" I asked, taking a sip of my wine. "What do you mean? Like, we're just sitting here in the middle of nowhere, and if something were to happen, no one would even know." Sarah chuckled. "You're being dramatic." But I wasn't being dramatic. There was something unsettling about the place, something that gnawed at the back of my mind, making me feel like I was being watched. I didn't say anything about it, though. I didn't want to sound paranoid. We went inside a little while later, settling down in the living room to watch a movie. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the cabin felt even cozier with the warmth from the flames. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, but it kept tugging at me, like a nagging thought that wouldn't go away. Around midnight, after we'd finished the movie, Sarah went to bed. I stayed up a little longer, scrolling through my phone, checking emails, and idly browsing social media. The dim light from the lamp by the couch cast strange shadows on the walls, and it felt like the darkness outside was pressing in against the windows. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up with a start. I blinked, confused. My phone was still in my hand, but the room was dark now. The fire had died down to just glowing embers. It was the kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of every little sound. The faint creak of the house settling, the distant rustle of trees, and something else. Something softer. I sat up, holding my breath. There it was again, a soft, scratching sound. It was coming from outside, just beyond the window, like something or someone was tapping gently on the glass. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal. But the scratching sound continued. Tap, tap, tap. Closer now. I felt my heart start to race, and my stomach turned with unease. I stood up, walking quietly over to the window. The porch light outside flickered, casting brief flashes of light across the yard. Nothing. I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I peered outside. The clearing was bathed in shadows, but I couldn't see anything that could explain the sound. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a tree branch swaying in the wind. But then I noticed something, a shape just at the edge of the clearing where the forest began. There was something there, a figure. I couldn't make out any details, but I saw it. A dark silhouette standing still, like it was watching the cabin. My chest tightened, and I stepped back from the window. I tried to calm myself down, but the image of that figure lingered in my mind. Had it been there the whole time? Had I missed it earlier? I glanced at the clock. It was after 2 a.m. I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there, frozen in place. I couldn't just ignore it. I needed to make sure everything was okay. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out onto the porch, squinting into the darkness. The air felt colder now, the kind of cold that made you want to rush inside. But I stood there, staring into the woods, waiting for any movement. Nothing, just the sway of trees and the stillness of the night. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe someone trying to mess with us, maybe a prank, but I didn't see anyone. I took a deep breath, chalking it up to nerves. There was nothing to be afraid of. I turned to head back inside when I heard something, a soft whisper carried on the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low and distant. My blood ran cold. I ran back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to wake Sarah. She'd probably laugh at me for being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to settle back on the couch, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the woods. Was it real? Had I imagined it? At some point, the darkness outside began to lighten as the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon. I had no idea how long I had been awake, but I could feel the exhaustion weighing on me. I heard Sarah stirring in her room, the soft shuffle of footsteps. I wanted to tell her about what had happened, but I wasn't sure how. She'd probably just think I was being silly. She emerged from her room, rubbing her eyes. "Hey, you okay? You look a little freaked." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was weak. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." She stretched, yawning. "Well, you're not the only one. Let's get some breakfast, huh?" I nodded. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe it had all been in my head. But the unease in my stomach didn't go away, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. We spent the morning in relative peace, walking around the cabin, gathering firewood, and making a small breakfast. But the quietness of the place seemed different now, heavier, somehow. As if the forest around us was closing in, its shadows growing longer with every passing hour. Later that afternoon, I couldn't help myself. I had to go back outside, back to the spot where I'd seen the figure last night. I didn't tell Sarah what had happened. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I needed to know if I was just imagining things. I walked around the edge of the clearing, my footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. The sun was high now, and the forest seemed almost peaceful, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filling the air. But when I reached the spot where I had seen the figure, my heart stopped. There, just at the edge of the trees, was a mark in the ground. A deep, almost unnatural gouge in the earth, like something heavy had been dragged through the dirt. I felt my stomach churn. It wasn't just my imagination. Something had been here. Something or someone. But who? What? I backed away slowly, the unease in my chest tightening with every step. Whatever had been out there, it was real, and it wasn't going to stop watching us. That night, when the sun had finally set and the cabin was quiet again, I could feel the tension in the air. I didn't sleep. Neither did Sarah, I later learned. But the next morning, when we woke up, the strangest thing happened. The cabin was normal again, peaceful, almost welcoming. The marks outside had disappeared, the air felt fresh, and there was no sign of anything unusual. It was as if whatever had happened hadn't happened at all. But I knew better. We left that morning, packing up the car and I don't know why I said yes to the trip. I guess I thought a few days in the woods might clear my head. My job had been eating me alive. My apartment felt more like a box than a home, and I was sick of waking up to the same city noise every morning. When my old friend Matt called, saying he had a cabin up north, miles from anyone, I figured why not. Maybe fresh air and silence were exactly what I needed. It took me 5 hours to drive there, the last 30 miles on a winding dirt road that kicked dust high into the air. I hadn't seen another car for the past hour. It felt like I was the only person alive. When I pulled up, the cabin looked smaller than I expected. Just a simple wooden structure, maybe 2 rooms total, with a narrow porch and a metal chimney. Matt wasn't there yet. I figured I'd unload my gear and get a fire going. The air was crisp, and the smell of pine was thick. I liked it. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I stepped up onto the porch, hearing the wood creak under my boots, and unlocked the door. Inside, it was simple, wood panel walls, an old couch, a stone fireplace. A doorway led to what I assumed was a bedroom. There was no electricity, just an old gas lamp on a side table. I put my bag down and checked my phone. No service. Not surprising. Matt had said there wouldn't be any, which was fine. That was part of the appeal, right? Getting away from it all. I pulled some firewood in from the small shed outside and got the fireplace going. The warmth spread fast, filling the cabin with that deep, woody scent that always reminded me of fall. I cracked open a beer and sat on the couch, letting my mind go quiet for the first time in ages. But something felt off. Not in a horror movie way. Not yet, just a vague feeling, like I was forgetting something important. I shook it off, just my brain adjusting to the silence. An hour passed, no sign of Matt. I checked my watch, 5:47 p.m. He said he'd be here by 5. I wasn't worried yet, but it was weird. I tried to call him, but of course no service. No Wi-Fi, no way to check if he had texted me earlier. Maybe he had car trouble. Maybe he'd just lost track of time. I stepped outside to look down the road, but all I saw were trees. The sun was slipping lower, throwing long shadows over the ground. The quiet was thick, too thick. Back home, there was always some kind of background noise, traffic, voices, sirens in the distance. Out here, it was just wind through the trees. And then I heard it. A crunch. Close. I turned fast, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing. Just the woods, the same as before. Maybe a deer. Maybe a branch snapping under its weight. But my heart was beating a little harder than it should have been. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me, even though I felt stupid doing it. Matt was just late. That was all. No reason to be on edge. Another hour passed. Then another. I ate a sandwich from my cooler, drank another beer. The fire crackled, the only sound in the whole world. It was past 9 when I finally admitted it. Matt wasn't coming tonight. Maybe not at all. I wasn't sure what to do. Leaving now wasn't an option. Driving that dirt road in the dark wasn't something I wanted to risk. Plus, I was exhausted. Maybe Matt would show up in the morning, apologizing for whatever had happened. Yeah, that was the most likely thing. I decided to sleep on the couch, not bothering with the bedroom. Something about the idea of lying in a separate room, out of sight of the front door, made me uneasy. I turned the lamp down low, leaving just enough light to see. The fire was dying, but I let it. I pulled my blanket over me, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know when I fell asleep, but I know when I woke up, because something had knocked on the door. I shot up, heart slamming into my ribs. My first thought was Matt, but no, he wouldn't have knocked. He would have just walked in. Another knock. 3 slow, steady taps. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, just listened. Then nothing. Silence. It stretched on so long I started to wonder if I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, maybe a tree branch, maybe, creak, the porch, the wooden boards shifting under weight. Heavy weight. I reached for the knife I had packed, gripping it tight. My mind raced. It wasn't an animal. Animals didn't knock. And it wasn't Matt. Couldn't be. If it was him, he would have called my name by now. Creak. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, just like that, the sound stopped. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Nothing else happened. No more knocks. No more footsteps. Eventually, I convinced myself that it had to be some stray hiker. Someone lost. But at that hour, out here, I barely slept after that. Every tiny noise made me flinch. By the time the sun came up, I had already packed my stuff. Matt or no Matt, I wasn't staying another night. I stepped onto the porch, gripping my knife tight. The woods looked normal, like nothing had happened. But when I turned to shut the cabin door, my stomach dropped. The lock was broken, not forced, not smashed, just broken, like someone had picked it, like someone had been inside while I slept. I didn't check. I didn't want to know what might have been in there with me. I got in my car and drove. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. 5 hours later, I was home. I called Matt, but it went straight to voicemail. He never called me back. I never heard from him again. A few months later, I looked up the property online. There was no record of it belonging to Matt. In fact, it had been abandoned for years. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing, I'll never go back. I never planned on spending the night in that cabin. It was supposed to be a quick stop, a place to rest for a few hours before continuing my drive north. But plans change. Sometimes they change in ways you never expect. It was early November, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and settles deep in your bones. I had been on the road since sunrise, pushing through empty highways that stretched endlessly through thick forests. My destination was a small town about another 5 hours north, where my cousin had a place and promised a warm meal and a couch to crash on. But by the time the sun started dipping below the tree line, exhaustion hit me like a brick wall. I could feel my reaction time slowing, my eyelids getting heavier with every mile. Then, as if it was meant to happen, I spotted a small wooden sign barely visible on the side of the road. Hunter's Rest Cabin 2 miles. I hesitated, but the thought of driving through the pitch-black wilderness in my half-conscious state wasn't exactly appealing. A warm cabin, even just for a few hours, sounded a lot better than the alternative. I turned onto the narrow dirt road, my tires crunching against the gravel as the trees seemed to close in around me. The cabin sat at the end of the path, tucked between tall pines. It was old logs stacked together with thick mortar, a slanted roof covered in damp leaves, and a small chimney poking out from one side. A single wooden porch wrapped around the front, with a few steps leading up to the door. There were no cars, no lights, no signs of life at all. Just silence. I parked my car a few feet away and stepped out, stretching my stiff legs. The air was still, thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. I tried the front door, expecting it to be locked, but it creaked open with barely any resistance. That should have been my first warning. Inside, the place was about as simple as I expected. A small wood-burning stove sat in the corner, with a pile of neatly stacked logs beside it. A worn-out couch faced a dusty coffee table, and a single wooden chair was pushed up against a rickety dining table. The floor creaked under my boots as I stepped further in, scanning the room. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, like it hadn't been touched in a while, but it didn't feel abandoned. There was no power, but I found a few old oil lamps near the stove. I lit one, the soft glow pushing back the shadows. The warmth from the small flame made the room feel less empty, though the silence still pressed in from all sides. I sat on the couch, rubbing my hands together to fight off the lingering cold, and told myself I'd just rest my eyes for a bit. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, the lamp had nearly burned out, casting the room in deep shadows. My neck ached from the way I had slumped forward, and the cabin felt different. I listened, holding my breath, but there was nothing, just the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. Then, somewhere outside, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. I sat up, straining to hear. Could have been an animal, maybe a deer moving through the woods. But it wasn't. The steps were slow, deliberate, too heavy for an animal, too cautious for someone who was supposed to be there. I reached for my phone, but my hand stopped halfway. What was I going to do? Call someone? The nearest town was miles away, and I doubted I'd even have service out here. Instead, I stayed still, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin, moving from one side to the other. Not hurried. Whoever was out there wasn't lost or passing through. They were listening, watching. Then, a sound that made my skin crawl, the soft, almost careful turn of the front door handle. I barely had time to react before the door creaked open an inch. Just an inch. Pause. Then it slowly swung open a little more, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to stay still. Maybe they thought the cabin was empty. Maybe if I didn't move, they'd leave. But they didn't. The door opened wider. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. The presence of someone just beyond the threshold. Waiting. I moved without thinking. Grabbing the oil lamp, I stood, my breath shallow. The dim flame barely reached the doorway, but it was enough. Enough to catch the briefest glimpse of movement. A figure just outside, stepping back into the shadows. Not running, not startled, just waiting. I slammed the door shut and threw the latch into place. My mind raced. Who the hell was out there? What did they want? I backed away, scanning the cabin. There were no weapons, no way to call for help. Just me, trapped inside, with someone standing just beyond the thin wooden walls. Minutes passed, then an hour. Silence settled again, but I knew they were still there. I could feel it. The air was thick with something unspoken, something wrong. I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, listening to every small sound, every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind. The hours crawled by. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes, the first pale light of dawn was seeping through the cracks in the wood. I waited, listened. Nothing. Slowly, I moved toward the door, my hands shaking as I lifted the latch. The morning air was cold as I stepped outside. The woods were still, the trees standing like silent witnesses to the night before. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there at all. But as I turned back to the cabin, my stomach dropped. The door, the same door I had locked myself behind, the one I had slammed shut in a panic. It was wide open, and I knew without a doubt I hadn't left it that way. I didn't wait to think about it. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the main road with the cabin nothing but a memory behind me. I never told anyone about it, never looked back. But even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I can still see that door, still feel the presence just beyond it, and I still wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. I don't know why I ever agreed to go to the cabin. Maybe I thought it would be peaceful. Maybe I thought a week alone in the woods would help me clear my head. I don't know, but I regret it now. Every single part of it. It started as a simple idea. A solo trip. Just me. A small rented cabin deep in the Washington woods. a stack of books, and no cell service. I wanted to disconnect from everything. I had been feeling burned out: work, life, people. The thought of nothing but trees, fresh air, and silence sounded perfect. I found the place online, an old but sturdy log cabin about 10 miles from the nearest town, a small place called Red Hollow. The pictures showed a cozy space with a wood-burning stove, a little kitchenette, and a deck overlooking a lake. Perfect. I arrived in the late afternoon. The drive up had been long. The last stretch nothing but a narrow dirt road winding through dense forest. The trees were thick, pressing in on either side of the car. I remember feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off as city nerves. I wasn't used to this much wilderness. The cabin was exactly like the pictures. Small, rustic, and isolated. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away, according to the rental listing. Just the way I wanted it. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I unloaded my stuff quickly. Some groceries, clothes, my books. The inside smelled like old wood and dust, but it was clean. A single bedroom, a small bathroom, a kitchen with an old gas stove, and a tiny living room with a fireplace. The deck out back overlooked the lake, still and dark, reflecting the sky. That first night was uneventful. I made a simple dinner, read for a while by candlelight, and then went to bed early. I didn't realize how dark the woods could get. No streetlights, no passing cars, just blackness pressing against the windows. I heard the occasional crack of a branch outside, probably animals. I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself to sleep. The second day, I explored a little. I walked down to the lake, dipping my hands into the cold water. I wandered through the trees, careful not to go too far. It was peaceful. By afternoon, I was back on the deck with a book. I let myself relax. Then, that night, something changed. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding. I didn't know why at first. Then I heard it. A noise outside. A soft, deliberate sound. Footsteps. I froze. My first thought was a deer, maybe a bear. But bears don't move like that. Bears don't walk with steady, measured steps. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The footsteps circled the cabin. Slow, unhurried, like whoever or whatever was out there was in no rush. I listened, heart hammering. Then the steps stopped right outside my bedroom window. I didn't dare look. The curtains were thin. If someone was out there, they could see me. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited. The footsteps stayed for what felt like hours, then moved away, back into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came, and with it a sense of relief. In the daylight, the fear felt silly. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was an animal, after all. I tried to shake it off. That afternoon, I hiked a little further, but something felt different. The woods no longer felt peaceful. They felt wrong, like they were watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder. At one point, I found something that stopped me cold. A set of footprints in the dirt. Human, leading towards my cabin, not away from it. I followed them back, heart pounding. They stopped right outside my deck, right where I had been sitting the day before. My stomach turned. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair. I kept a kitchen knife next to my bed. I barely slept. Every noise made my skin crawl, but nothing happened. The next day, I made the decision to leave early. The whole trip was a mistake. I packed up my things, threw everything in the car, and turned the key. The engine didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I checked my phone, no service, of course. I wasn't a mechanic, but I knew enough to see that nothing obvious was wrong. The battery was fine. The gas tank was full. It just wouldn't start. Panic set in. I was miles from town with no way to call for help. I told myself to stay calm. I could walk. It would take a few hours, but I could make it. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed in some water and food, and started walking. The forest felt suffocating. The trees too tall, too thick. Every sound made me jump, but I pushed forward. Then, after about an hour, I saw it. Another cabin. It wasn't supposed to be there. I had checked the map before coming. There was nothing out here, but it was real. A small, dilapidated structure, half hidden in the trees. Something about it made my skin crawl. I should have kept walking, but something pulled me towards it. Maybe I thought someone inside could help. Maybe I was just too tired to think straight. The door was slightly open. Inside, dust floated in the air. Smelled damp, rotting. The furniture was old, untouched, but there were signs someone had been here. Recently, an empty can on the table, a blanket folded on the couch. And then I saw it, a notebook sitting open. I picked it up. The pages were filled with messy handwriting. Dates, times, entries about me. The car won't start. He doesn't know why. He saw the footprints. He's getting nervous. He's leaving tomorrow, but he won't make it. I dropped the notebook. My blood went ice cold. Someone had been watching me. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the cabin. I locked every door, every window. I knew I wasn't alone out here. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the knife in my lap, waiting, listening. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard it again. The footsteps. They didn't circle this time. They came straight to the door. A knock. Soft, gentle. I didn't move. The knock came again. Then silence. And then the doorknob turned. It was locked, but I held my breath. I thought of the notebook. The words. He won't make it. The knob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated. I didn't move until the sun rose. The first light, I left everything behind and ran. I ran until I reached the road, where a trucker picked me up. I told him my car broke down. I didn't tell him the rest. By the time I returned with help, my car was gone. The cabin was empty. No signs of anyone. No footprints. No notebook. Just an empty cabin in the woods. I never went back. I never wanted to go back there, not after what happened. But here I am, sitting in my truck, staring at that old cabin in the woods, the one I swore I'd never set foot in again. It's been almost 15 years, and it still looks the same. Weather-beaten logs, a sagging roof, the front porch tilting just slightly. The forest has started to reclaim it, thick with overgrown brush and trees pressing in from all sides. It should have collapsed by now. It should have been swallowed whole by the woods, but it still stands. I don't know why I came back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some sick need for closure. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to prove to myself that what happened that night was all in my head, that I imagined it. But as I sit here, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turn white, I know that's a lie. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that, no matter how much I try to explain it away, there are things in this world that don't make sense. Back then, I was just a kid, 19, fresh out of high school, dumb and full of that reckless confidence that makes young men think they're invincible. My friend, Paul, had the idea to rent a cabin for a week. Just a getaway, he said. No cell phones, no distractions. Just us, a few cases of beer, and the great outdoors. At the time, it sounded perfect. There were 4 of us, me, Paul, his cousin Eric, and my buddy Danny. We packed light, drove up to the mountains, and found the place just as the sun was setting. It was old. I mean, really old. The kind of place that looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. Dust covered everything inside, and the furniture was sparse. Just a couch, a few chairs, a rickety table. The walls were lined with shelves, but most of them were empty, except for a few scattered books and a rusted lantern. There was a fireplace, but the chimney was clogged with years of neglect. The air was thick with the smell of rot, mold, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place at the time. We settled in fast, cracked open some beers, and sat around the table, telling stories, laughing, being idiots. It wasn't until later, when the fire was dying down and the forest outside had gone completely silent, that I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't anything obvious, just a creeping sensation, like being watched. The others didn't seem to notice, so I shook it off. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just the cabin being old and creepy. But then the noises started. First, it was just scratching. Light, almost hesitant, coming from inside the walls. Probably rats, we figured. nothing to worry about. But then it got louder, heavier, like something was moving, something big. The others heard it too. We turned off the music, held our breath, and listened. A long, dragging sound coming from the back room. Danny, being the idiot he was, grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. "Probably a raccoon," he muttered, trying to sound tough. But when he opened the door, the room was empty. Just a bed, a wooden dresser, and a closet that smelled like mildew and dead leaves. The window was shut. Nothing had gotten in, and yet we had all heard it. We tried to laugh it off. "Old houses make weird noises," Paul said. "Wood expands, animals scurry. Nothing to freak out about." But I could see it in their faces. They were all thinking the same thing I was. That didn't sound like an animal. We went to bed a little after midnight. I took the couch while the others spread out in the 2 small bedrooms. The fire had died completely, leaving the cabin in almost total darkness, except for the slivers of moonlight cutting through the trees. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. That's when I heard the door. Not the front door, the back door, the one we hadn't even opened. A slow creak like it was being pushed, just slightly, then stopped. My stomach turned to ice. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears ached. Nothing, just silence. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through the kitchen, past the table, towards the living room where I lay frozen. My mind screamed at me to move, to get up, to run, but I couldn't even breathe. Then they stopped, right behind the couch. I wanted to scream, to leap up, to swing wildly at whatever was standing there, but I couldn't move. I could only lie there, every muscle locked in place. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. And then, the whisper, not words, not even a voice, really, just a breath right against my ear. Hot, damp, inhuman. Then nothing. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. The next thing I remember is the sun rising, golden light pouring through the windows. I sat up so fast my head spun, looking around wildly. The cabin was empty. The back door was locked. My friends were still asleep. I never told them. What was I supposed to say? That something had been inside? That I had felt its breath on my skin? That I had heard footsteps, whispers? They wouldn't have believed me. Maybe I didn't even believe myself. We left that day, packed up, and drove back to civilization, never once talking about it. I never went back. Until now. I don't know why I got out of the truck. I don't know why I walked up those old wooden steps and pushed open the door. The air inside was thick, stale, just like before. Dust covered everything, but nothing had changed. The couch was still there. The table, the chairs, even the books on the shelves untouched by time. And then I saw it. The blanket on the couch. The same one I had slept under that night 15 years ago. But it was folded, neatly, like someone had been expecting me. And that's when I knew. I hadn't imagined it. Something had been here that night, and it still was.